motion except one. 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce or their respective designees. And 2, 1 motion to recommit. Section 3, upon adoption of this resolution, it shall be in order to consider in the House a joint resolution, Senate Joint Resolution 11, providing for congressional disapproval under Chapter 8 of Title 5 United States Code of the rules submitted by the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management relating to protection of marine archaeological resources. All points of order against consideration of the joint resolution are waived. The joint resolution shall be considered as read. All points of order against provisions in the joint resolution are waived. The previous question shall be considered as order on the joint resolution and on any amendment thereto to final passage without intervening motion except one. 1 hour of debate equally divided and controlled by the chair and ranking minority member of the Committee on Natural Resources or their respective designees. And 2, 1 motion to commit.
The gentleman from New York is recognized for 1 hour.
For the purpose of debate only, I yield the customary 30 minutes to the distinguished gentleman from Colorado, Mr. Neguse, pending which I yield myself as much time as I may consume. During consideration of this resolution, all time yielded is for the purpose of debate only. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks.
Without objection.
House Resolution 177 provides for consideration of 2 measures, H.Res 42, H.Res 61. The rule provides for both bills to be considered under closed rules with 1 hour of debate each, equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking minority member of the Committee on Energy and Commerce or their designees, and provides for 1 motion to recommit. Additionally, the rule provides for consideration of H.Res 11 under a closed rule with 1 hour of debate, equally divided and controlled by the chair and the ranking minority member of the Committee on Natural Resources or their designees, and provides for 1 motion to recommit. Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of this rule and in support of the underlying legislation. The rule before us provides an opportunity for Congress to reverse the last-minute attempts at regulatory overreach by the former Biden and Harris administration. The rule includes consideration of H.Res 42 to provide for congressional disapproval of an 11th hour Biden Department of Energy rule relating to, quote, energy conservation program for appliance standards, certification requirements, labeling requirements, and enforcement provisions for certain consumer products and commercial equipment. This rule was rushed out by the Biden administration as they worked overtime in their final days to get a fresh round of burdensome product mandates out the door. The rule in question is just one example of the former administration's war on products that the American people used to take for granted, affordable, reliable home appliances. In an effort to appease a woke mob, the Biden DOE foisted burdensome regulations atop a certification and efficiency standard process that was already drastically broken. The rule in question requires additional certification, additional labeling, and for manufacturers to meet additional reporting requirements. By the Department of Energy's own estimates, this one rule will increase annual costs for manufacturers by $213,000 and result in thousands of hours spent on additional paperwork to meet the new requirements. Now, make no mistake, with every new standard, rule, prohibition, and restrictions on manufacturers, the American people are left with fewer options that are more expensive and too often perform worse than previous models. In the last 4 years alone, the Biden administration issued 31 regulations aimed at residential and commercial appliances and equipment with a total cost to industry and ultimately to the consumer of at least $60 billion. Mr. Speaker, the American people, they are fed up with the micromanaging regulatory agenda of the previous administration. Their voices were heard very loudly on Election Day, and President Trump has already delivered on his promise to bring the regulatory relief to Americans, pausing implementation of 7 of the Biden administration's restrictive mandates on home appliances in an effort to undo the previous administration's burdensome policies that have driven up costs, reduced choice, and diminished the quality of Americans' home appliances. Real financial pain is felt by Americans when rules like this one take effect. And it falls to Congress to ensure that the Department of Energy can course correct away from these anti-consumer and anti-choice requirements. And in that spirit, the rule also provides for consideration of H.Res. 61, providing for congressional disapproval of the rule submitted by the Biden EPA relating to the national emission standards for hazardous air pollutants for rubber tire manufacturing. Section 112 of the Clean Air Act mandates emission controls for sources of 187 hazardous pollutants, and the EPA is expected to establish technology-based emission standards for sources of these pollutants, as well as specify categories of sources subject to emission standards. However, surprising to no one, the Biden administration's EPA, at the behest of a radical environmental group, has disregarded a technology-based, fact-based approach and completely weaponized this process against the industry. In a flurry of regulatory activity in their final hours in power, the Biden EPA finalized a rule to impose unnecessary new regulations on our tire manufacturing industry, all with zero environmental benefit. This is the legacy of not just the Biden administration, but also the Obama administration nearly a decade earlier. A weaponized EPA working at the behest of radical environmental groups to roll out regulation after regulation that drives up costs, kills jobs, and shutters domestic manufacturers, all in the zealous pursuit of the left's Green New Deal agenda. If the EPA's final rule is allowed to survive, we will see tire manufacturers sink millions of dollars into new compliance costs, spend thousands of additional hours in meeting requirements of this rule, and struggle to keep manufacturing here in the United States. This rule shows us an agency that has moved hastily to comply with frivolous lawsuits, using questionable data in the process. And for decades, the left has used a sue and settle strategy to force the EPA to push for a more aggressive, more onerous, and less affordable set of standards on American job creators, American workers, and American families. As a representative of Western New York and the Southern Tier, many of my constituents were recently laid off after a tire manufacturing facility announced its closure in decision to move overseas, where CO2 emissions will almost certainly be higher and the requirements around environmental stewardship are far less stringent. This is the reality that awaits America's domestic manufacturing base if we allow our regulatory agencies to cater to the radical left and asinine Green New Deal fantasies, as they are doing with this rule. H.Res. 61 will ensure Congress, through the Congressional Review Act, can put a stop to these unnecessarily new costs that threaten the viability of American manufacturing. And finally, the rule before us provides for consideration of H.Res. 11, which provides for congressional disapproval of a rule submitted by the former Biden administration relating to, quote, protection of marine archaeological resources. Mr. Speaker, despite the innocuous name, the rule itself could not be more ridiculous. Federal agencies have spent hundreds of millions of taxpayers' dollars surveying the seabed of the Gulf of America and have identified to date approximately 4,000 shipwrecks and other sites. Yet this expensive and time-consuming work is apparently not enough. Under this rule, oil and gas operators seeking to drill offshore in the resource-rich Gulf of America are now required to do their own additional surveying to, quote, better protect shipwrecks and other cultural resources on the seabed. It is lost on no one that this is highly redundant, unnecessary regulation is nothing more than a last-ditch discriminatory action by the Biden administration aimed right at our nation's oil and gas industry. The mandate will force companies to spend untold resources scouring the seabed for potential shipwrecks, even without any previous indication that such sites may exist. To be clear, there is already a regulatory framework to mandate a report on potential sites on the seabed when the regional director of the Bureau of Ocean Energy Management has, quote, reason to believe that an archaeological site may exist. So let's stop pretending that this rule is anything more than a continued effort to bury companies in reporting, run up costs, eat away their time, and move the goalposts for American energy producers. Time and again, we've seen these tactics used by Democratic administrations in Democratic-run states when it comes time for our oil and gas producers to get to business. In my own state of New York, the few oil and gas producers hanging on in a state that has made it very clear that they are unwelcome face a deluge of unnecessary and redundant compliance costs like these, meant to do one thing: put them out of business, shutter an industry, kill jobs, and leave our nation more reliant than ever on foreign energy sources. That is what will come from the left's overzealous war on oil and gas production. We simply cannot allow these asinine rules and regulations to go forward at the federal level. H.Res will ensure that Congress, in lockstep with President Trump and his administration, can break down the barriers set up by the Biden years and bring down costs of everyday Americans. I urge my colleagues to support this rule, and I reserve the balance of my time.
The gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman from New York, Mr. Langworthy, for the customary 30 minutes, and I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks and yield myself such time as I may consume.
Without objection, the gentleman is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, I want to try to clarify for the American people, those who may be tuning in, certainly the individuals who've joined us in the gallery today, what this debate is all about. Just by way of context, let's consider what's happening in the world today. I don't know if my colleague from New York has checked his phone, but the stock market is plummeting. Plummeting. 401ks of residents in New York, residents in Colorado, wiped out. Massive tariffs that the President of the United States applied to our neighbors at midnight that we know will increase the prices of everything. Groceries, fuel, energy, you name it. Mass layoffs of federal workers, mass purges of veterans at different federal agencies, mass terminations of Forest Service employees in my district working on wildfire mitigation, scientists at NOAA, individuals doing cancer research. All of that is happening as we speak. And here we are in this august body debating what? Labeling requirements for appliances. That's what the Republicans have decided to spend today debating. Labeling requirements for pool heaters. I don't know. Maybe that's, I don't know if the gentleman from New York has a pool. I don't have a pool. I don't understand why we are wasting time in the House of Representatives debating regulatory requirements for pool heaters, labeling requirements for coolers and air conditioners. Seriously? Stock market is crashing? And this is how House Republicans choose to spend their time? Government funding is about to dry out 10 days from now? And we want to spend our time talking about pool heaters? Give me a break, Mr. Speaker. Let's get serious. This isn't what the people of the United States elected us to do. I would implore my Republican colleagues, come to the table, work with us in good faith, stand up to the Trump administration that is dismantling federal agencies in your own districts. Social Security offices being shut down. Constituents who can't get services from the federal government because this president has decided to dismantle these agencies piece by piece. It's time to get our priorities right, Mr. Speaker. And I can assure you that the priorities that the House Republicans are pursuing today and have been pursuing for the better part of the last 2.5 months are grossly out of step with the values of the American people. It's why I would hope every member of this body would oppose the rule. And I will reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Colorado reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Well, I'd like to remind my Democratic colleague that the rule we're debating today provides for consideration of H.Res. 42 regarding a Department of Energy appliance rule, H.Res. 61 regarding an EPA national emission standard rule on the rubber tire manufacturing, and S.Res. 11 regarding the EPA's Bureau of Ocean Energy Management rules requiring burdensome archaeological reports on energy producers. There'll be ample opportunities to debate, amend, and provide suggestions when the appropriate authorizing committees move forward when we begin our work on spending reforms in a budget reconciliation package. We should focus on the legislation before us this week, and I encourage my colleagues to engage in regular order as we're authorizing committees begin to work on our reconciliation and not prejudge their outcomes and make baseless assumptions. You know, my colleagues across the aisle have mentioned how they find these measures not worthy of our time. And this certainly isn't the first time they've mocked House Republicans' efforts to curb regulations on appliances, from heating systems to dishwashers, refrigerators, and freezers. But if this were such an unserious endeavor as my colleagues across the aisle claim, then why did the administration they supported for 4 years issue at least 31 regulations covering a vast array of different appliances and other products out of the DOE and the EPA? Is $60 billion foisted onto our nation's manufacturers and consumers in new regulatory and compliance costs not serious enough for Congress to thoroughly scrutinize? Democrats seem to be confused about what it is that the American people voted for in November, and one of those items was lowering day-to-day costs that are hurting workers and hurting families. Reversing these regulations is something that House Republicans are deeply committed to doing, and we are working with the administration to actually get this done. I'd also recommend that my colleagues across the aisle speak with the fellow Democrats in their conference about how harmful these regulations are and why CRAs to reverse Biden's anti-energy and economically harmful regulations are so important. Last Congress, Democrats voted with Republicans to pass at least 5 measures to halt Biden administration green energy regulations, including the following: a CRA to halt the Biden definition of the waters of the United States. 9 Democrats voted yes. A CRA to halt draconian emission standards on heavy-duty vehicles. 4 Democrats voted yes. A CRA to halt draconian emission standards on light and medium-duty vehicles. 8 Democrats voted yes. In this Congress, a whopping 11 Democrats voted just last week in support of a CRA on the Biden administration's rule on energy conservation program to conservation standards for consumer gas-fired instantaneous water heaters. One of those appliance-related regulations that my colleagues here today claim is not worth our time in the House, but their colleagues voted yes. And finally, 6 Democrats voted yes on last week's CRA to halt the Biden-era implementation of a natural gas tax that would harm our nation's energy producers and consumers. The Democratic Party is busy pulling their hair out over President Trump, Elon Musk, Doge, whatever else is their outrage of the day. But they've lost sight of the kitchen table issues affecting everyday Americans. They ignore the rising costs, hurting workers and families in order to cater to their own extreme left-wing base. It is so bad that even members of their own caucus are breaking ranks to vote for common-sense reforms, such as the rolling back these radical anti-energy agenda items that the Biden administration foisted upon us in the 11th hour of their administration. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from New York reserves. The gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
Yeah, I think the Speaker, it feels like I'm living in the twilight zone. Again, I understand the gentleman from New York very much wants to spend a half hour debating labeling requirements for pool heaters. I get it. We all get it. It's important to you. It's not important to me, not important to the people that I represent. In the 5 minutes that you just spent describing the reasons for this bill in your view, the stock market has continued to go down. More corporations have announced that they'll be increasing prices later this week because of President Trump's tariffs. I don't understand how you believe that that is lowering costs. Again, I would implore my colleagues, let's get serious. There are plenty of substantive challenges facing this country that merit and warrant the attention of lawmakers here in Washington. And for the record, House Democrats are not scared to debate any single one of them. Apparently, reports this morning indicate that in the Republican caucus meeting, a member of Republican leadership stood up in the meeting and supposedly told his caucus a simple instruction. Not a single one of you should attend or participate in a town hall. Why? Because they are scared of their own constituents, Mr. Speaker. They understand that if they hold a town hall with their community, they will hear outrage from everyday American citizens who are pissed off, who are angry that the prices for everything are going up because of this reckless Trump administration's policies. Again, you want to spend a half hour, an hour, 8 hours debating labeling requirements for pool heaters? Be my guest, but don't expect House Democrats to participate in it. I want to yield now to the gentleman from California, Mr. Speaker, because if we defeat the previous question, I'll be offering an amendment to the rule to bring up H.R. 1637, the Protect Veteran Jobs Act. Mr. Speaker, we have a distinguished member from the great state of California, Mr. Derek Tran, a veteran who served our country honorably, who can speak to the reasons why this amendment is so important. And I'd like to yield 4 minutes to the gentleman to do so.
Members are reminded to direct their remarks to the chair. The gentleman is recognized for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I thank the gentleman from Colorado for yielding. I rise to urge my colleagues across the aisle to show some humanity and compassion to the thousands of veterans who have been recklessly dismissed from their civil service jobs at the political whim of this administration. The men and women who serve our country deserve our unwavering support, not broken promises. The indiscriminate firing of veterans by the Trump administration and Elon Musk dishonors the unwavering commitment that these public servants have dedicated to our country. These heroes stepped up for us, and now we must stand up for them. This issue is deeply personal to me. I am the son of Vietnamese refugees who fled war and persecution in search of safety and a better life in America. This country welcomed them and gave me the chance to succeed. I joined the Army out of a sense of duty to my country because I wanted to give back to the country that gave me so much. I wanted to protect the very principles of freedom, justice, and decency that we hold dear. But I don't see these values in the actions by the Trump administration. I see only chaos, fear, and cruelty. I have a duty as a congressman, as a veteran, and as a proud American to stand up for those who made the highest commitment to us. That is why last week I introduced my first bill, the Protect Veteran Jobs Act, to reinstate veterans who were recklessly terminated without cause under the Trump administration's purge of the federal workplace. My bill will also hold the executive branch accountable for any future terminations that may occur. This isn't about politics. This is about basic decency. This is about treating our veterans with the dignity they deserve. Veterans make up 30%, over 30% of the federal workforce. And when they are unjustly removed, it impacts all of us, from delays in healthcare services and disability claims to staffing shortages at the VA. The consequences for the American families and service members are dire. Veterans have always had our backs. It's time we step up to have theirs. I urge my Republican colleagues to join us in opposing the previous question so that we can take up this important measure to restore the livelihoods of veterans who have served our country honorably and who have continued to do so through civilian service. Let's reverse course immediately and get these veterans' jobs back. Thank you, and I yield back.
And yields back. Gentleman from Colorado reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, you know, we listen to calls from our Democratic colleagues for compassion and concern. I must ask the question, where was the compassion and concern while they watched prices skyrocket over our constituents over the 4 years of the Biden administration? Where was the compassion and concern where the Biden regulatory environment smothered the U.S. economy with regulation after regulation, trillions of dollars in off-budget spending, and it soared inflation over the American people? Where was that compassion then? Where was the outrage when House Republicans were calling for relief for the American people for the last Congress? They said that we were following the wishes of only President Trump. They follow the Green New Deal playbook to a T. And that's what we're here to debate today, are these important rollbacks of the Green New Deal agenda. I mean, we sat idly by and watched our country get invaded by at least 10 million people that came across this country with the direct will of the president to do it. President Trump has proven in just less than 2 short months the ability for a president to roll this all back with executive order. Yet the cost to New York alone was $7 billion in costs on New York taxpayers. Where was the outrage then? For 8 years, this hysteria has cost them. While they persisted in their witch hunt of President Trump in 2022, Americans contended with 40-year high inflation after Democrats and President Biden dumped trillions of dollars into a recovering post-COVID economy, which even one of their chief economists told us it would create massive inflation. They ignored that guidance. Did they seek to address everyday Americans' concerns about the direction of our economy? They did not. They doubled down on lawfare against President Trump, and they lost them the House in 2022. And in 2024, when the world was on fire, with our borders, they were flung open to the invasion of millions of illegal aliens into this country. They prompted a crisis in countless communities, including my own, with Americans' #1 concerns coming back time and again, poll after poll, as the economy in our border. Democrats did no work to address those concerns. Did Vice President Kamala Harris? No, she did not. She didn't make that sale to the American people when she was campaigning across this country. Instead, all we heard was about Kamala Brat Summer and the last-ditch jittery attempt at once again trying to convince Americans that Trump was somehow a threat to democracy. And Democrats lost historically on November 5th, 2024. They lost the electoral vote, they lost the popular vote, and they lost every swing seat on the table. Did Democrats learn from this smarting defeat since President Trump took office? They clearly have not. Instead, they focused their time again defending USAID slush funds, flat-out government waste, and pretty much every problem trying to lay it at President Trump's feet, including what he's doing every single day, as well as DOGE, and how they're trying to fix the crisis in the mess that was left behind by the Biden years. Mr. Speaker, the American people have time and again responded to Democratic hair-pulling with, at best, disinterest. Yet here we are today on the House floor with more of the same. The rule before us considers legislation focused on ridding American consumers in an industry of harming regulations that are truly impacting their wallets and their financial well-being and our nation's economic future. I urge my colleagues to quit the hysterics and for once listen to the voices of the American people after years of refusing to do so. And I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from New York reserves. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
I thank the Speaker. I've got great respect for the gentleman from New York. And, we have a lot of folks who come to Washington, D.C. to observe these proceedings. And I suspect it might seem a little rote to them. Would love to have an actual debate. Maybe there's some folks here from New York, some folks from Colorado who'd like to see us engage in some substantive debate. And so I might ask the gentleman from New York, because he ended his last remarks by appealing to the voices of the American people, and that he and his caucus, in his view, are standing up for the voices of the American people. I wonder if the gentleman might answer a question. Mr. Langworthy, have you held a town hall this year? It's not a rhetorical question. I'm just asking. Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, if I might ask the gentleman from New York, I believe colloquies are permitted in this chamber for the staff on the other end. At least that's so I am asking, rather through the Speaker, to the gentleman from New York, if he has held an in-person town hall with the people of New York that he represents this year. I'm just curious. He doesn't have to answer if he doesn't want to answer. I don't say yes or no question. It's not a complicated question. Okay, I'll take it as a no. I mean, clearly he's not held a town hall in 2025. I think he would be jumping up to clarify the record that he, in fact, had met with his constituents, Mr. Speaker, if that were the case. He clearly has not held a town hall. I understand why. I get it. Because at this juncture, if House Republicans held town halls as their constituents expressed their outrage and indignation at the mass layoffs of federal workers, of civil servants, and at the tariffs that are increasing prices, and at the stock market crashing, if their only response is we took up a really important bill this week on labeling requirements for pool heaters, I could understand why one would have some trepidation about hosting a town hall in those circumstances. Again, let us be serious about the work that we are called to do in this body. We're here to lower costs for working families, to build safer communities, to ultimately ensure that the American people, the American taxpayers, the Constitution is vindicated. It is unfortunate that my colleagues don't feel the same way. I'll reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserves. Members are reminded to direct their remarks to the chair. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
Mr. Speaker, we've seen a lot of masterful theatrics out of the Democratic Party recently, and we're seeing nothing different from that today. It's amazing that people that are so concerned about burdensome regulations and costs on people offer no solutions. We are here doing the work of that today. We are taking price concerns off of the back of industries. We're preserving jobs, and we are creating a brighter future for our communities by getting rid of this 11th hour rulemaking that was put forward by the Biden administration. They had all the power to make this country move in the right direction when Democrats controlled all of Congress and the White House following the 2020 elections. They had the ability to make those changes, but they took the country in the wrong direction. And that's why the country at the ballot box made the changes that they made. They took the House out of Democratic hands and made Republicans lead the House of Representatives. And then they did the same with the Senate and the White House in 2024. That is the report card that the Democratic Party earned, because they prioritized the things that the American people did not want prioritized. They haven't read the room. They answer to their woke and angry mobs that they are, foisting on members of Congress and people all over the country right now. It's a very coordinated effort. They deny it, but make no mistake, every U.S. senator today released a video that has the exact same script. It is very clearly a theatrical performance that the American people are seeing out of Democrats in the U.S. Senate. We're here with solutions to problems created by the last administration. We're putting it forward to get the job done. We have a timeline that we have to focus on, and that's why these CRAs are so important for us to tackle right now. We have limited legislative days in order to roll back these unnecessary, burdensome regulations that no one asked for and no one wanted. And we're getting the job done that we were sent here to do. But let's look again at the numbers. The Biden administration has issued at least 31 regulations for residential and commercial appliances and equipment, totaling $60 billion. If my friends on the other side of the aisle don't think that added regulatory costs filter in the price of new appliances, then we have several bridges available for them to purchase. Let's look further at some of the regulations that will reap American consumers in terms of financial savings. In one example, under the Biden DOE's dishwasher efficiency standards, Americans are expected to save a whopping $1.12 under that regulation. Was that necessary to put out there? Of course it wasn't. These are savings that the left expected the American people to be excited about as they racked up more regulations and more restrictions that cost us jobs from the results of the Biden years. And under the latest DOE rule that H.Res 42 would fortunately curb, home appliance manufacturers have already already outlined how the rule requires their industry to provide a myriad of unnecessary information and data that is meaningless when demonstrated efficiency, but simply is required to meet compliance with the rules. It's regulations for the sake of regulations, and the American people are left to pay higher prices and fewer choices. And at the end of the day, Mr. Speaker, my colleagues simply refuse to acknowledge the natural dynamics of the marketplace. When left to their own devices, the American people will seek out the most efficient model of an appliance that they can afford. And I agree with my colleagues when they say that the American people want cost savings, both at sale and efficiency over the lifestyle of an appliance. But what they don't want is government intervention that limits their ability to make those choices themselves. They want to have more affordable options available to fit tighter budgets, not fewer, more expensive choices, because unelected bureaucrats at Biden's DOE needed to micromanage what refrigerators, dishwashers, heaters, air conditioners, you name it, are permissible under unrealistic efficiency standards. H.Res 42 will help curb these costly, limiting, and anti-natural gas standards from the final days of the gasping Biden administration that were finalized at the behest of his radical climate lobby. I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from New York reserved. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
I thank the Speaker. We've heard a lot about so-called theatrical performances. I didn't realize that asking the simple question of whether or not the gentleman had held a town hall this year counts as theater. I understand it's a forbidden question in the House Republican Conference now as to whether or not one has held a town hall for obvious reasons. So, but my constituents certainly don't find that to be an offensive question. We've held 5 town halls in the last 2 months. We look forward to holding more because we're going to be responsive to the American people. I wish my colleagues would do the same. But look, what I won't do, and I think what the American people won't do, is be lectured by Republicans about rising costs when literally as we speak, Trump's tariffs are taking hold and beginning the process of increasing prices, which already started 30 days ago, and putting it into overdrive. These are just a couple of headlines from the last 8 hours. New England, New York grid operators prepare to collect millions in tariffs on Canadian electricity. New York Post, car prices could potentially surge by $12,000 because of these tariffs. House Republicans have the audacity to lecture us about increased costs when they are increasing the costs of everything. And by the way, this is not some foreign debate. I represent Colorado, proud to represent the great state of Colorado. I've never been to the gentleman's district in upstate New York, but my understanding is it's pretty close to the Canadian border. Billions of dollars of economic development in New York, of commerce that's transacted between Canada and the United States. What, a mere few miles from the gentleman's district? And he describes this as theater? I'm not so sure that the folks in his district, that the people of New York will feel that way as these tariffs begin to kick in. I'm sure that the farmers and the ranchers in Colorado that I represent, I can assure you they won't call it theater. Mr. Speaker, I understand that my colleagues on the other side of the aisle would like to spend every second of every minute of every day talking about the prior president. It's been a half hour now of my colleague on the other side of the aisle. Every sentence starts and ends with Joe Biden by my colleague. Donald Trump is the president of the United States. My colleague reminds us, yes, Republicans have a majority in the House and in the Senate. And all I'm suggesting is that maybe they should use that majority to do better things than waste everyone's time on labeling requirements for pool heaters. That's it. That maybe we ought to be a little bit more concerned with the 401ks of our constituents, of working families in Buffalo and in Fort Collins, Colorado. I don't think that's too much to ask. I'll reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman from Colorado reserves. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
The epiphany, Mr. Speaker, that those on the other side of the aisle now have, and they're so concerned about costs and economic concerns, when they fought us tooth and nail on every single action that we tried to take to curb the Biden administration's uncontrollable regulatory environment, is just laughable. I mean, we watched, we warned, and we fought in the 118th Congress to stop an administration that created a regulatory environment that has added about $1.5 trillion in needless regulations that has stifled the growth of industries and jobs in this country. And now you're seeing them all of a sudden change their tune. And as our new administration is less than a month and a half old, things are moving in the right direction. People are having a new view of what the future is. We are fighting hard to preserve a predictable, tax code in this country, extending the current tax code so that we can have regulatory certainty, tax certainty, so that businesses can thrive and grow and not fear the hammer of government that they did under the Biden years. I mean, there was an explosion after Election Day of people ready, willing, and able to invest in America. We have seen unprecedented investment come in from overseas, bringing new jobs, new opportunities, and new future creation here to the United States since Election Day. And that will continue because that is what President Trump campaigned on. That is what House Republicans fight for and what we will achieve together. I mean, this epiphany that we've had on the other side of the aisle, that they are now all of a sudden concerned with the costs of everyday Americans. They were nowhere to be found for 2 years in the 118th Congress as we fought every day about the cost of gas and groceries and how it was pinching away because of Biden's inflation and what it had done to the purchasing power of everyday Americans' accounts. People in probably both of our districts said the same exact thing, that they were watching the American dream slip away from our kids and our grandkids because we couldn't necessarily be certain that the future would be brighter under the current trajectory of this country. And we've saddled the country with $36.5 trillion in debt, a debt service that is higher than what we spend on our national defense. It's an unacceptable legacy that we're leaving to our future generations. And we are working every day towards our budget reconciliation to get that under control so that we can be the era that bent the curve on spending and got this country back on track. Yet we have people on the other side of the aisle that want to keep spending levels at the COVID era. COVID, fell upon us 5 years ago this week. Yet they want to still spend like we're in the midst of an emergency. And it is time that we have a common sense revolution in this country. Common sense like what we're doing here today, rolling back needless regulations that hurt jobs, that hurt workers, and hurt consumers. That's what we were asked to do by our constituents. This takes choice. These CRAs this week are important because they reinstitute choice in the marketplace. They take the bureaucrats that DOJ is fighting every single day out of the equation and put the American consumer back in the driver's seat so that we can have choice in our consumer goods, not creating a standard just to justify someone's job in a cubicle somewhere. That's what this government's been about for far too long, but those days are over. We're now putting common sense in the driver's seat in this country. We're working towards a brighter future for our kids and our grandkids, and I'm prepared to close, and I reserve the balance of my time.
Gentleman reserved. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
I thank the Speaker. Look, as expected, a rebuttal replete with references to the 118th Congress and what Democrats did in the last Congress and assigning blame and all the rest. I would just remind my colleague, you are in charge. You have the majority. You have the ability to shape events. You have a Republican president. and a Republican majority in the U.S. Senate. I can certainly assure you that my constituents who are seeing their 401k balances vanish in real time would not describe your policies as common sense. Stock market tanking, prices of fuel going up, prices of food going up, prices of cars, vehicles going up, car insurance, home insurance, you name it. Under Trump's economy, everything goes up. And by the way, he's unabashed about it. I mean, I watched some of his press conference yesterday. He's not hiding it. He's acknowledged it. He has said outright, I know these tariffs will increase prices in the short term, according to him. And he expects the Republican caucus to defend him, tooth and nail, as these prices go up. The gentleman talks about economic growth. The Federal Reserve, the Atlanta branch, yesterday, just yesterday, forecasted negative GDP growth for this quarter. First time in a long time, negative GDP growth under President Trump. This is the common sense agenda that my colleague from New York sells to farmers and ranchers in Colorado? We're not buying it. The American people aren't buying it. It's why I would implore every member of this body to oppose this rule. And Mr. Speaker, it's also why I would implore everyone to support the amendment to the rule that we would like to pursue by bringing up H.R. 1637, the Protect Veteran Jobs Act, which was brought up previously. And I would ask unanimous consent, Mr. Speaker, to insert the text of my amendment into the record along with any extraneous material immediately prior to the vote on the previous question.
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker, I am prepared to close, and I'll reserve the balance of my time.
Members are reminded to direct their remarks to the chair. Gentleman from New York is recognized.
I reserve.
Gentleman reserved. Gentleman from Colorado is recognized.
I thank the Speaker. I'll direct my comments to the chair, to you, Mr. Speaker, to express my frustration, which is the frustration felt by so many of the hardworking people of the great state of Colorado that I have the privilege of representing in the House of Representatives. It is a frustration born from the realities that they are facing each and every day. As I mentioned, an economy that's in free fall, a stock market that is tanking, seeing their neighbors, their friends, public servants being purged from federal agencies, hardworking civil servants who do wildfire mitigation work in Colorado and across the Rocky Mountain West, unceremoniously fired, scientists at the NOAA and NWS facilities in Boulder and elsewhere being subject to these mass terminations. A federal executive who seems intent on dismantling agency after agency. And a House Republican caucus that is walking with him lockstep every step of the way as they prepare to slash Medicaid to the tunes of hundreds of billions of dollars. The frustration that my constituents feel is justified because notwithstanding every single one of those transgressions, every single one of those challenges, those obstacles that Republicans have manufactured and created in their daily lives, if they tune into this debate, they will see that the focus is on none of it. And instead, on the matters that we've discussed today. My constituents, Mr. Speaker, do not want to see me debating labeling requirements for pool heaters. They don't. I won't speak for what the people of New York have to say about their representatives. I will just say for Colorado and Coloradans, they expect me to be here pursuing policies that will make their lives easier, that will promote economic growth and a better quality of life. And they're not getting it from this House under Republican control. That I can assure you. I understand House Republicans, I'm sure, will pass the rule. They'll get their bill on water heaters and pool heaters and air conditioners passed through the House. They'll have a big fancy signing ceremony at the White House where they'll celebrate the fact that they repealed a labeling requirement rule that was promulgated a year ago. I fear for what the broader economic trends will be when they have that signing ceremony. Who knows? But if past is prologue, reasonably confident that the economy will continue the free fall unless Republicans work with us as Democrats in good faith to pursue policies that would advance opportunity in our country. That's my humble request, Mr. Speaker, and the best way to get started is by opposing the previous question, opposing the rule, opposing the underlying bills, and getting back to the business of this House. And I yield back the balance of my time.
The gentleman from Colorado yields back. The gentleman from New York is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I am prepared to close and yield myself the balance of my time.
Gentleman's recognized.
For 4 years, Democrats gaslit the American people in a vain attempt to convince them that costs weren't going up, inflation wasn't real, our economy wasn't in trouble, and there wasn't a crisis at our borders. The American people saw past that deception, and they voted for a president and a Congress that promised to put our country back on track. Part of fulfilling that promise includes unwinding a slew of burdensome rules, prohibitions, restrictions, and other ticky-tacky attempts to micromanage everyday life for Americans. It also includes ensuring that the woke mob and their radical environmental NGOs can no longer call the shots at these federal agencies at the expense of our domestic manufacturers, our domestic energy producers, and good-paying jobs. I strongly support the rule before us today, and with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back the balance of my time, and I move the previous question of the resolution.
Gentleman yields back. The question is on ordering the previous question on the resolution. Those in favor say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. No. In the opinion of the chair, the ayes have it.
Mr. Speaker, I ask for the yeas and nays.
The yeas and nays are requested. Those favoring a vote by the yeas and nays will rise. A sufficient number having risen, the yeas and nays are ordered. Pursuant to Clause 8 of Rule 20, further proceedings on this question will be postponed. Pursuant to Clause 12A of Rule 1, the Chair declares the House in recess subject to the call